When I signed up for the Faith River Youth Camp in rural Kentucky, I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted a break. My ex had left me months ago, not with drama, just distance. The kind of distance you feel even when they're right beside you. I needed silence, prayer, a reset. What I got was Clancy. I remember the moment he walked into the fellowship hall. The lights were low, the worship band softly strumming something acoustic, and the smell of coffee and old hymnals floated in the air. Clancy wore navy corduroy trousers and a forest green shirt, sleeves rolled up. His name tag hung lopsided from his chest. Clancy Monroe, West Branch, Iowa. He laughed too loud, smiled too easily. But when he sat next to me during the group breakout and leaned close to whisper, "Don't worry, they won't make you share," his breath brushed my ear, and I swear, something inside me shifted. Not lust. Not yet. Just a question. Over the next few days, Clancy and I were paired for everything. Prayer walks, cleaning duty, trust exercises. And each time he touched my shoulder, or passed me a rag, or pressed his fingers against my arm during a game, my skin lit up. I caught him looking at me once, when I was scribbling something in my journal. His gaze wasn't curious, it was hungry, gentle, afraid. At night, I prayed hard. For clarity. For strength. But when I heard Clancy humming in the next bunk, heard his sighs in the dark, felt the heat in my chest, I started wondering if maybe the laying on of hands could mean more than prayer. We didn't talk about it. Not out loud. But our glances were gospel. Our nearness was psalm. And that night, during the midnight intercession session, when everyone stood in a circle holding hands, Clancy's thumb brushed mine. Just once. A flicker of electricity. I held my breath, and he held my hand tighter. Somewhere in me, something broke open. Something beautiful. The sky was still glowing with that stubborn kind of twilight, the kind that hangs on just a little too long. We'd left the others behind in the mess hall, where laughter echoed off plastic tables, and someone kept burning marshmallows. But Clancy wasn't laughing. "Walk with me," he asked, his voice barely above the chirp of crickets. We climbed the path behind Cabin Ela, boots crunching against gravel and pine needles. Neither of us spoke until we reached the clearing, the place where the hill broke open into sky. "I come here every night," he said quietly. "Even before I met you. It's the only place I can hear myself." He sank to the stone and looked out over the trees, knees drawn up, fingers knotted together. "I've spent most of my life running from silence," he admitted. "But lately, it's the only place I want to be, especially when you're in it." My chest tightened. "I thought I was imagining it," I murmured, taking the spot beside him. "The way you look at me, the way it feels." His breath caught. He turned to face me, and the honesty in his eyes made my throat close up. "I like you, Alder," he said, with a steadiness I didn't expect. "I mean really like you." And before I could answer, he leaned in. Not timid, not trembling, just sure. Our lips met, soft at first. A question. Then I answered. I tilted my head, deep in the kiss, let my fingers find the edge of his jaw. His hand slid to my waist, grounding me like an anchor in a storm. There was no urgency, no fumbling. Just breath and warmth and the unspoken ache of finally being seen. When we pulled apart, neither of us said a word. Our foreheads rested together, our noses brushed. His smile was quiet, but it filled me up like a hymn. "I've never done that before," he said. I laughed, breathless. "You're good at it." He chuckled, then bit his lip like he couldn't believe this was real. This doesn't feel wrong." "It doesn't," I said. "It feels like faith, the kind that actually means something." The stars came out slowly that night, but we didn't rush. We just sat there, hands linked, hearts wide open, and let the sky wrap around us like a promise. Back at Cabin Ela, the room was dim, thick with the muffled snores and rustling of sleeping bodies. But for me, everything was pulsing, alive, like the air itself had been rewired. Clancy climbed into the bunk beneath mine. We didn't say a word. We didn't have to. But somewhere around midnight, I heard him whisper my name. "Alder." I leaned over the rail of my top bunk and peered down. The moonlight carved shadows across his face, making his eyes look even softer than before. "I can't sleep," he said. I hesitated for maybe half a second, then climbed down the ladder without a word. I slipped into the space beside him, careful not to wake anyone else. We didn't touch at first. We just lay there, inches apart, sharing silence. His breath slowed as mine deepened, and the nearness of him was louder than any prayer we'd spoken all week. Then his hand brushed against mine. Slowly, deliberately, he slid his fingers between mine, like he'd been waiting to do that for years. "You make me feel quiet inside," he said. "And safe. And sort of terrified, too." I turned toward him and met his eyes. "I know," I whispered. "Me too." He pulled me closer, one hand curling behind my neck, and kissed me again, longer this time. Still gentle, but fuller, like he'd stopped second-guessing it. My hand rested on his chest, and I felt the way his heartbeat sped up, wild and nervous. There was no rush, no hands wandering, just the deep, slow rhythm of two people finally finding space to feel something real. We kissed until the quiet felt like home, until the world outside the cabin slipped away. Then we lay there, foreheads pressed together, his breath on my lips. "I don't know where this goes," he said. "You don't have to," I replied. "You're here now. That's enough." And it was. In that tiny bunk, wrapped in moonlight and tangled breath, we didn't just rest. We belonged. If this story is making you feel something, that quiet ache in your chest, that secret smile you didn't plan, then it's time. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Let us know what part of the world your heart is beating in. Your comment could be the one Clancy and Alder would read under a tree, hand in hand, smiling. It was the third morning since the kiss. The air was sticky with Kentucky heat, the kind that clings to your skin and never quite lets go. The whole camp was headed to the river for the annual baptism games, a weird mix of spiritual rebirth and water balloon warfare. Clancy and I hadn't talked about that night in the bunk, but we hadn't stopped looking either. Every glance was its own kind of confession, every moment near each other, brushing past at the juice station, kneeling side by side during morning devotion, buzzed with unspoken heat. It was like we were in on a secret too sacred to name. At the river, everyone stripped off to their camp t-shirts and shorts. The counselors tried to keep things reverent, but the water was too tempting. It wasn't long before the games began dunking, splashing, diving like kids who forgot what rules were. Clancy caught my eye from across the riverbank. Clancy caught my eye from across the riverbank. He smirked, then ran straight toward me. I barely had time to brace before he tackled me into the water. We went under with a loud splash, limbs tangled, laughter bursting between us like breath. When we surfaced, he was inches away. Water slicked his lashes, made his lips look brighter. His hands were still at my waist, holding me steady in the current. Around us, campers were yelling and throwing soak sponges. But in that moment, we were alone. "You okay?" he asked, brushing hair from my eyes. "I'm better than okay," I said. My voice felt raw, unfiltered. And then, right there in the river, surrounded by chaos, joy, and the smell of wet pine, he kissed me again. Not long. Not even deep. Just a brief press of lips, a promise disguised as a dare. No one saw. Or if they did, no one said anything. We laughed like nothing had happened. But everything had. Back on the shore, as we sat wrapped in towels side by side, Clancy leaned close and whispered, "Do you think God gets it?" I turned to him. "I think God's watching and saying finally." He smiled. And I swear, I felt it settle somewhere inside me. Not just the kiss. The knowing. The final night of camp always ended with a candlelight service. It was supposed to be sacred, a space to reflect, to recommit, to breathe in the silence before going back into the noise of the world. I hadn't seen Clancy all afternoon. We'd been split into different groups, I helped paint signs for the closing program while he led worship rehearsals with the band. But I felt him everywhere. Like air. Like gravity. The chapel was packed. Everyone wore white. Rows of flickering candles lined the windows and the altar. The room hummed with anticipation, not just spiritual, but something more human, more raw. I spotted Clancy across the room as we filed in. He was already seated on the floor, his face cast in soft amber light. He looked peaceful and devastatingly handsome. When his eyes found mine, they lingered. No smile, just a knowing. I sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth from his leg. The service began. Soft hymns, whispered prayers, silent tears. It was beautiful, but all I could think about was how close he was. How I wanted to reach out and take his hand. But I didn't. Not yet. Then came the part where we each lit our own candle and whispered a word, a prayer, a hope, a truth. Clancy's turn came before mine. He lit his candle and held it up to the sky. Freedom, he said, so quietly I might have imagined it. When it was my turn, my voice shook. Belonging. And I knew I wasn't just speaking to God. The lights dimmed further as everyone's candles flickered, small glows in a sea of shadow. And that's when he did it. Clancy reached over and placed his hand on mine. Not hidden, not ashamed, just steady, real. The world didn't stop. No gasps, no lightning, but something inside me shifted. Afterward, we walked back to the cabins in silence, our hands still loosely entwined. Did that feel like too much? He asked, voice low. No, I said. It felt like finally. We paused under one of the old oak trees. He turned toward me, our fingers still laced. And in the hush of the night, surrounded by the soft crackle of crickets and the scent of ash and candle wax, he kissed me again. It was unhurried, reverent, less about want, more about worship. And in that kiss, I felt everything I'd ever prayed for, softness, safety, something holy and entirely human. That final night, no one slept. The cabins buzzed with laughter and flashlight games, people exchanging numbers, camp shirts signed with Sharpies, hearts both full and aching. But I wasn't in the mood for noise. I slipped out and found Clancy leaning against the rail outside the mess hall, looking up at the stars like they'd just whispered his name. He didn't look surprised to see me. Couldn't sleep. I asked. Didn't try, he replied. Felt like if I closed my eyes, it'd all be over too fast. I nodded, stepping beside him. Come on, he said suddenly. I know a place. We walked through the woods behind the staff cabins, our phones lighting the path. The air smelled like damp earth and pine needles. Eventually, we reached a clearing with an old wooden swing dangling from a thick branch, swaying gently in the wind like it had been waiting. He sat first. I joined him, knees touching, the night curling in around us. I don't want to go back yet, he said after a while. To Iowa? I asked. To pretending. I didn't answer right away, because I knew exactly what he meant. So I reached out and touched his face. He leaned into it, eyes closed. You don't have to pretend with me, I whispered. He turned to me slowly, and we kissed. But this time, there was no hesitation. His hand slid behind my neck, mine to his waist. There was urgency, not lust, but need. The kind of need that comes from waiting too long to be known. We didn't take off clothes. We didn't explore each other's bodies. We just held on, tightly, fiercely, as if trying to carve the moment into memory. At one point he pressed his forehead to mine and whispered, "This is my first time. Not like that. But with someone who really sees me." I swallowed hard. Me too. We lay down in the grass beside the swing, his head on my chest, our fingers intertwined, our breaths sinking slowly. I traced circles on his back. He hummed something soft, tuneless, his voice vibrating against me. It was the most intimate thing I'd ever experienced. No climax. No fireworks. Just this warm ache, this quiet, burning truth that neither of us had known how to name until we touched it. He fell asleep like that, in my arms under the stars. And I stayed awake, watching the way his chest rose and fell, wishing morning would never come. I woke before Clancy did. The sky was just beginning to pale, soft strokes of lavender breaking against the horizon. His cheek was still pressed against my chest, his arm curled tightly around my waist like he hadn't let go, even in sleep. I stayed still. I didn't want to wake him. I wanted to stay there, in that suspended moment where nothing was required but breath. But eventually, he stirred. "Morning," he asked sleepily, his voice rough with sleep. "Too soon," I whispered. He didn't move right away, just blinked up at me, eyes soft, mouth parted like he was about to say something, but didn't. Instead, he pressed a kiss to the spot just below my collarbone. We sat up slowly, brushing grass from each other's shoulders. The mood had shifted. Not colder, just quieter. Like the earth knew what day it was. We walked back to camp in silence. When we reached the cabins, the first buses were already pulling in. Luggage lined the paths. People hugged like it was the end of the world. I stood by my duffel bag, trying to tie the drawstring, but mostly just fidgeting. Clancy walked over, hands in his back pockets. "So, Iowa," he said, trying to smile. "And you've got South Carolina," I replied. He nodded. "Yeah." We stared at each other. There were 100 things I wanted to say, but they all got caught in my throat. He stepped forward, close. Too close. "I want more than this week," he said quietly. "I know it sounds impossible, and maybe it is, but I don't want this to be it." I reached up and cupped his face, thumb brushing his cheek. "It doesn't have to be." His mouth met mine one last time, not a desperate kiss, not a goodbye kiss. It was a keep this with you kind of kiss. He lingered there, lips soft and still, before pulling back and whispering, "Write me. Text me. Just don't forget this." "Never," I said. He turned and walked toward his bus, looking back only once. And when he did, I gave him a look I hoped said everything I couldn't say out loud. I stood there long after the buses pulled away, clutching a note he'd slipped in my hoodie pocket. Inside it just said, "You made me believe again. Whatever this is, I want it. All of it." It was 6 months later, and I was still carrying him in every quiet moment. Clancy. We hadn't spoken every day, but when we did, it felt like slipping into a familiar rhythm, like praying in the dark and knowing someone's listening. Sometimes it was texts, sometimes voice notes, sometimes silence, but the connection never thinned. And then, out of nowhere, he messaged me, "I'm coming to Charleston. 2 days." I found a way. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask how. I just sent back, "I'll be here." It was late afternoon when I saw him again. He stepped out of a beat-up gray shuttle van, hoodie up, backpack slung over one shoulder. His hair was longer, curlier around the ears. He looked older, tired, glorious. When our eyes met, he dropped the bag, jogged the last few feet, and pulled me into the kind of hug that says everything without words. And then we kissed. Right there on the sidewalk. No fear. No hesitation. Mouths open, breaths short, arms wound tight around each other like the world might try to interrupt us again. But this time, we wouldn't let it. "You're here," I breathed against his lips. "I had to be," he whispered back. I couldn't leave this in a memory. We didn't go anywhere fancy. Just my little apartment near the bay, string lights tangled on the balcony, a small couch, 2 mugs of hot cocoa between us. He took off his hoodie, kicked off his shoes, curled his legs beneath him on the cushion like he belonged there. Because he did. As the sun melted into orange and lavender, he leaned against me, head resting on my shoulder. I ran my fingers through his curls. He hummed, that same quiet sound from the bunk that night, and it wrapped around us like a lullaby. "Do you remember," he murmured, "that first night in the clearing?" "I remember everything." "I was so scared," he admitted. "But with you, even the fear felt right." I turned to him, brushing my lips against his temple. "This," I said, "is the laying of hands they never warned us about." He laughed, soft, stunned. This is the kind that heals. And later that night, in the quiet of my room, with nothing between us but trust and time, we held each other. Slowly. Intimately. Like we were both learning how to be touched for the first time. No one rushed. No one reached for more than what was offered. But everything about it was enough. Fingers tracing spines, noses brushing necks, breath sinking again like it had that night on the hill. Only now it wasn't borrowed time. It was ours. And when we finally fell asleep, our legs tangled under one blanket, hands still clasped like prayer, I realized something. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of one that we would write hand in hand, again and again.